Hey there, friend. Do any of these seem to resonate with you? I am angry they died that way. It's not fair. I can't believe it's real. Nothing seems to matter anymore. Everyone seems to have moved on. I have problems sleeping. Mornings and nights are the hardest. I feel guilty and don't want to be a downer in people's conversations. I get triggers when I see places we've been together. I feel overwhelmed and hopeless. These are the raw, honest words of individuals who have walked the path of grief and loss. If you find yourself nodding along, feeling the weight of these emotions, know that you are not alone. When you're going through grief and loss, it can send trauma and shock to the body. And so emotions of sadness, depression, anxiety, it all can be overwhelming, making you feel stuck in the pain of the past. If you're ready to feel less alone and release that pain and heal in a comfortable and safe environment, I invite you to join my Grief Relief Live program. Enrollment is now open, and I'd be honored to have you join us. You deserve peace and healing from your pain. To learn more and sign up, visit thehappyhealingshop.com/grief. Again, that's thehappyhealingshop.com/grief. After leaving the corporate 9-to-5 grind, I became the boss of my own spiritual business, helping others explore and navigate the human experience from insight, wisdom, and lessons learned along the way. Today, I help aspiring spiritual entrepreneurs gain the confidence to share their gifts with the world. Welcome to the Happy Healing Shop podcast. I'm your host, Trang Pham Nguyen, and each week we'll dive into incredible stories of strength, resilience, and transformation. So, if you are ready for some serious breakthroughs, laughs and tears, and stories that will inspire you, you are in the right place, my friend. Let's get started. I don't even know how to start this episode, but today will be a very teary-eyed episode for me. Previously in episode 14, we talk about, with a panel of guests, about death, grief, and loss. But today will be my personal story of when my mom passed away about, 3 years around January, mid-January. Everything's all blurred because it was 2021? So around that time. And when I look back at my diary notes, that's when I realized about how much pain I was in. And I think it's because the way my mom died was so sudden. Pretty much what happened was I got a call from my dad, and he said, your mom fell and she's going to go get kind of hip surgery around that area. My mom was handicapped, with her leg, but as she got older, it became more frail. And so it's like a standard routine surgery. This is probably towards the end of COVID, because I remember in May was when they came out with the vaccine, I think, and start rolling it out to everyone. So there were still COVID procedures put into the hospital and stuff like that, where you can only have one person visiting at one time. And my dad, he lives in Virginia, just outside DC, and he said, your mom hasn't woken up from surgery, and it's been a while. And I remember thinking oh, it's, they said she has a stroke, and I was like, oh, it's probably a little one, and that's it, one where she'll kind of roll back and be fine. And then the next day, he said she still hasn't woken up. And that's when I think I felt that bottomless pit in my stomach and that gut. And I was like, okay, this is serious. And I have a cousin who's an anesthesiologist in California, where I currently reside. He lives actually quite far away, but he was saying that's odd and strange because he works in a hospital. And he's like, I at least check up on your patients within 1 hour if I don't see them wake up, because the machines can show that your heartbeat's rating, all that kind of stuff. And it's hard because during that time, I'm sure hospital staff were understaffed and overworked. And when that happens, people are going to be forgetful, negligent, or they just can't be in 10 million places at one time. It's just a bummer that in the hospital or places like that, if you make a mistake, it can cost someone's life. And I remember thinking oh, is this really happening? I remember thinking, okay, I guess I should fly over or something like that. Because, it's kind of thing where like the body's alive, but she might be like brain dead, which turns out this is what happened. And so it kind of was like a car accident, and someone died. It's someone coming in for routine surgery. Um, and I remember there is a Vietnamese family, thank God, in Virginia. And I call them the seven siblings because they're seven siblings, brothers and sisters with each other, but they're probably in their 40s and 50s. And I think my parents knew them from Catholic church, Vietnamese Catholic church. And so one of the siblings told me when I flew back home to Virginia, and said, um, your dad, when I opened the door, I remember seeing him and being like, oh my gosh, you are thin. You are bones. She felt his arm because she grabbed his arm. It's like, oh my gosh, you are bones. You need to eat. And his hair was like all white just from the stress. And I'm trying to hold back my tears so I can speak on a podcast because you don't want to hear me blubbering for the next, 23 minutes. Okay. And so she said he started eating more when I finally flew home. Keep in mind, I have an older brother. We don't talk. You'll see why. He lives only 90 minutes away around Richmond area, Richmond, Virginia. And so, but this whole entire time he was not involved. He said he had work, and he only has X amount of vacation days. Honestly, I just knew that he didn't even bother talking with this boss. He was just like, well, I don't have vacation days, But I remember one of the seven siblings said, like, don't you have FMLA leave? And so what that is, so in the States, if you're not from the States and listening in, there is a law where you can take off. I don't know what the amount of days is. I don't know, it's like a month or something like that, where you're unpaid, but you can take the time off to take care of a family member, and you can come back knowing that your job or an equivalent title of that job will be still available for you. So in this video or this podcast, you might see me closing my eyes or looking off the distance to try to recall what happened, everything. So I come home and my dad is just a wreck. He starts cooking because I'm there, he has motivation to cook, motivation to do something besides just, on top of being distressed. And every day we would drive to the hospital. And it was at least like a 30-minute drive each way. And I think for anyone listening in, I understand how painful it is. And I've talked to someone else that kind of went through something similar where their mom also just died kind of suddenly, kind of went into a bad state and then just like died suddenly. But their hospital drive was about an hour long. And part of you is relieved when it's over, when they pass away, or in some cases, they come home. But because it's such an emotional, long, not chore, but an errand to like kind of go back and forth to the hospital, it's like every day. And you're mentally just distraught. You're mentally feeling empty, or you're mentally like just sad, grieving, crying all the time. And I remember I had to be the parent for my dad. And there is a lot of anger and resentment I have against my brother because he didn't deal with any of it. So I went to the hospital, and at that time, the receptionist was just like, only one person can go up at a time. So my dad would sit down, I would go visit my mom. And I remember coming into the hospital room and seeing her, and she was definitely brain dead. Her eyes were open, but I was like, I knew that she was gone. I knew from a spiritual point of view, like her soul has left the body and she was just a shell. But when you see someone that was healthy and they look like a vegetable, it's really like, it's really hard hitting. I don't know, confrontational is the right word, confronting. But I think, so I just broke down. I remember breaking down in the hospital alone. And I remember saying to my mom, I forgive you for everything. And I know you're in a better place. Like, I couldn't even think of anything about, like, what to forgive her for. It's not like a specific example, but I just remember just saying that. Maybe, like, to make her feel better. Although I knew that she couldn't hear. Like, I knew she was gone. She was dead, from a scientific point of view. And there was so much family politics involved because the older people, my aunts, uncles, my dad, they were thinking she's in a coma and that she's still there. She's still listening. Whereas my cousins and even my brother and I, the one thing we agreed on actually, we believe more in science, I guess. And we knew that, and we have some of my cousins are like in the medical field. So they knew that she was done. Like, there's no way she's not going to wake up from this isn't a coma. It was like a massive stroke that killed every part of her brain except for, of course, the breathing part. So, looking back, I wish it just killed her, all of it, because the hard part was watching my dad. I've accepted her death pretty quick, which some people find weird, but it was watching my dad trying to let go of her and seeing I was in the hospital and I saw him beg God to bring her back, and I think that was the hardest part. I was fine with her dead, but my dad struggled so much. Keep in mind, my brother didn't have to deal with any of this. So I was emotionally keeping it together for my dad. And it was hard. It was hard for me to say, Dad, the hospital's saying, like, can we discharge her? And because, they need beds. But at the same time, my dad was thinking, his mindset was, oh, they're just trying to kick her out because they want to pay insurance. And obviously, from the business side, I'm pretty sure they're just like, it's also like, we don't need her here. Like, she's gone. She's done. But they didn't word it like that to my dad. And it took so many back and forths. And like, obviously, he's the one that had to he's the next of kin. So, or he had to make the decision. If it was up to me, I would have pulled the plug like right away already. I've been like, she's done, or give it like one day. But it took like a week and a half for my dad and he wasn't ready. So we finally decided, with me trying to nudge him, and the hospital's calling me every single day being like, have you made a decision yet? And I was like, look, this is what's going on. And finally we had, and there's, there's a phone call where they can have like a Vietnamese translator. And my dad, it was mental for my dad. So I remember the doctor taking me to a conference room. And he seemed like a few years older than me, maybe. I don't know, everyone had masks on that time. And I remember I will always be grateful for how he understood why my dad was taking a while to make a decision. And I think he might have been trying to buy his time, even though he knew what the outcome was. And we finally got a translator on the line. And there's been multiple calls, but we finally got a translator on the line, and we were trying to translate to my dad that, because my Vietnamese is like conversational, but it's not, I don't know medical terms. So, but I can tell if a translator is doing a good job or they're kind of not as skilled as translating when I listen to them. So they were pretty much translating what the doctor was saying, like, these tubes that are in her right now, they are not permanent. Like, they're there to just temporarily feed her through her mouth and through her throat. And if you keep them in for long, she will bleed. She will start bleeding from the mouth, from the nose, everything, because that tube is not meant to be in a human body, If you were to do a feeding tube, that would be where they cut an incision in your stomach and you put a tube in there. You take care of my dad's old, right? He's like now 70, in his early 70s, but he's also done so many laborious jobs that his body's a lot older than his age, if that makes sense, and very worn out. So if you were to do a cutting tube, you would cut something in your stomach and then put the feeding tube in there. And then you would have to feed and put food or that liquid, whatever, in that feeding tube. And the thing is, you do this at home every single day. And so that was the other option. And I remember the doctor telling me, honestly, like, she's a vegetable. So you could feed her through the tubes, but it will just honestly give her probably maybe 8 more months maybe. And I remember thinking, like, no, I would not do that. And the thing that people don't realize about family politics, which made it so much harder, was like my dad would tell me what he wanted. But when my uncles and aunts started butting in, I got so angry because my dad is easily influenced, especially by, like, I think he sees like other Vietnamese people as like wise. And I don't know. And I had an uncle. It's funny. It's interesting. He's dead now too. So he was saying, "Oh, I know this person. They did a feeding tube and stuff like that." So then my dad, originally he wanted to let go of my mom because he was like, "Okay, maybe it's time to let her go." But then he got influenced by that, and so the decision making took so much longer because someone told him, "Hey, try the feeding tube." I know someone that did that, but the thing is, the quality of life is not even there. So I think one thing I would say from this experience is, with your loved ones, your spouse, or anything, talk about, if this was to hypothetically happen to you, what do you want? Because I wish my parents talked about this, because I knew my mom. I haven't met anyone in my life that had said, if I'm a vegetable, keep me alive. Every single person I've spoken to has said, if I cannot have a good quality of life, let me go. That is like, please have a talk with your loved ones so they don't fight over it when the time comes. For my dad, though, I feel like with my mom's situation, she was going to die anyways. It was just more of like, when? And so yeah, and I remember there were only a few key moments that I just broke down really hard. And the first one was, again, like when I saw my mom. The second one was when my dad was in the conference room and the doctor was translating and saying, like, we can't, like, those tubes that, like, you can't, pretty much you can't stay in the hospital with those tubes on because she will bleed. And I remember my dad, he just took his hands together like this, clasped them together, and he just put them on the table and he put his head down. And you can tell he was silently crying. And I think seeing your dad just look defeated, look so defeated, was really, really hard. And I was trying not to cry at that time because I need to keep talking to the doctor. So that was really hard. Anyways, and then so eventually with time, and I was growing really impatient because I was kind of like the person the nurses and doctors called, and I was pretty much the one in a way in charge of taking care of everything. And then there's so much that goes into it, like once you realize they're dying, you have to take care of legal things, you have to take care of financial things, so all the banks, all the accounts, everything. Funny thing was, 3 months before my mom died, I remember talking to him on the phone, and I said, "Hey, you guys are getting old, so you need to get your paperwork together." And my mom scoffed at me and said, like, because I said, "Oh, you might die someday, because at your age." And she just scoffed at me, be like, "Huh, I'm not gonna die." And I was like, I remember during that time, I was like, "See what I told you?" I was saying that to her dead body. But so the thing that was a bit tricky was my mom was pretty much non-responsive. So it's not like she could sign any papers. So we went to a bunch of the banks and pretty much we got everything straight. It was like a rude, I think, awakening, a big awakening for my dad to be like, okay, let's get everything in order. So if you were to die, how are you going to split up or put the banks under whose name, that kind of stuff. So if my dad dies, we don't have a hard time trying to get that money to pay for the funeral and pay all these expenses and all that stuff. And from a legal point of view, yes, they had a will, but I learned that a living trust is kind of the way to go. Again, talk to your lawyer about this, but hopefully this will help you. But a living trust is pretty much when your parents die and they only have a will, what happens is, at least what I was told, is that when your stuff you would have to hire a lawyer to help you go through the process of the state, I guess, giving and divvying everything up to you or like the children and stuff like that. and I guess it's called probate, something like that. And it can take a whole entire year, and it's very stressful, all that kind of stuff. If you do a living trust, what happens is that you pay the lawyers to do a lot of the paperwork up front and sign off on it. And what it is it creates, like, think of it as an account. And this account has all your houses, your assets, your money, and all that stuff. And so, in this living trust account is either in your name or it's in you and your siblings' name. And so, when your parents die, it automatically divvies up to the beneficiaries. So, like me, siblings, that kind of stuff. So that's that. It took, I think it cost about, as of like 3 years ago, so that's like 2021. As of that year, it cost about, in Virginia, about maybe $1,500 to get all that paperwork done. But it will give you peace of mind, apparently, when death does happen. So anyways, we had to go through that. I had to find a Vietnamese lawyer so they can explain to my dad. And I remember my dad was being so difficult because he was like, I just want to do 50-50 for my children. And he's like, yes, but the lawyer was trying to say, I understand that. But the small 1% chance, let's say, if this were to happen, or, just like your wife, like if you need a medical directive, which is pretty much when you're about to die or dead, you need someone to say, like, assigned to say, like, pull the plug or not. And so he was like, I want both. But he's like, you need to, it was just my dad he was so gung-ho on like 50%, split 50 equally, that I forgot what it was, but the lawyer was just like, I understand that, but you have to think about every single hypothetical situation. So you need to designate a person for this. So yeah, and just dealing with all that stress and stuff like that. Because really, my dad, I was able to be, I guess in a way I was forced to be the level-headed one in this. And so my dad, because my dad he just couldn't. And I think dealing with family politics is it's kind of like when you're at work and you're trying to get work done, but there's so much work politics that doesn't need to happen, but it's making your job harder. This is exactly what it felt like, this whole process. I remember being like, I am so done. I am so over this. My brother had nothing to do with it. He was just living life as normal. There was also, we also attempted to sue for malpractice as well. And in that case, I think a lawyer takes the case if because it's a money thing, right? They'll take a case if they see there's a chance to win, or there's like an actual case. And so that's one thing my brother actually helped out with. He actually found a lawyer that took on the case. And it's funny because before my mom was buried, she actually, for the whole process, she had autopsy of the brain for them to, I think, dig in, look at the stroke and look through all the medical records. And this is the thing where I learned, where I was like, man, this is why I think hospitals have a higher chance of winning, is because in the medical records, they type up their notes. And sometimes it's brief, sometimes it's detailed, sometimes whatever. And you can actually request their medical notes through the hospital. And I was reading through it and trying to make sense of it. Obviously, the lawyers did that themselves, or their team. And you realize, like, they only have their notes. If you say something to them, or if you have your own notes, I was like, where do I put that? Like, and this was really sad, because at the same time, I'm like, no amount of money would have been able to cure or my dad's sadness, obviously, right? So fast forward, they said, like, as they kept looking through the records, they're like, I don't think there's not enough evidence to be able to go through with this case. And how do I say this? Because I was like, oh, maybe there's a chance of winning, because you can see the timestamps of everything, and you see when they checked on in. And they didn't check on her till like hours later, or I think like later in the day after the surgery. So, how do I describe this? Now, imagine you work at a company where you have let's say a racist boss, right? And let's say you have a Black coworker. And they're fine, their work ethic is fine and everything like that. And this boss is racist, but they don't say it in email or in notes or anything like that. And your Black coworker gets fired. And everyone else is like, oh yeah, that's because they probably got fired because that boss was racist. But there's no email trail, there's no paper trail, there's no anything. Obviously on paper, it might be just like, oh, they forgot to do XYZ, so negligence or whatever, so they're going to be fired. So I think that's the best way I can kind of say kind of what happened, although I'm probably not using the right terminology, but I'm trying to say in a layman's term that maybe you can understand. So that was that. I think the funeral. So the funeral happened, and they say that there's only a limited amount of people because it's COVID times, please. And the funeral director, I saw he had crystals and a Buddha statue on his side desk, and I was like, so we kind of connected on spirituality and stuff like that, and that's where I learned. Well, he told me that from his 20 plus years of working as a funeral director, he noticed that people who are Christian, especially Catholics, have a hard time with death and funerals because of that. Are they going to make it through the pearly gates of heaven, or like punishment and all that kind of stuff? Like he noticed that those groups tend to have a really hard time. However, he said with ones that are kind of based in spiritualism, so spiritual people, or Buddhism, or I think Taoism might be another one. There's a few other ones he named. He said they tend to cope better because it's part of their belief system. Death is part of that cycle in the belief system, and they tend to just deal better with death. And I thought that was an interesting fact. And yeah, so we really connected in that sense. And I remember just telling him, and he agreed. I was like, I wish they knew what we knew, because everyone there was Catholic, and they don't really believe in talking the afterlife like this, really. So, and he said, yeah, I wish people knew what we also knew as well. And so the funeral went as usual, long Catholic mass. And I remember just kind of, I wouldn't say zoning out, but honestly, to me, church was kind of boring. So, and it was also Vietnamese, so I kind of didn't really understand. But I remember just my dad trying to cope. And it was, I think at that time he was a bit more accepting of what happened. I forgot to rewind a little bit. So my mom, we took my mom home. It's the ambulance delivered her, and we finally decided to choose hospice care, which is pretty much you let her lie in the bed and you just wait for her body to die. It took like 2-3 weeks. Maybe 2 weeks. It was so long. I remember just thinking like, Mom, when are you gonna die so I can start funeral planning? Like die, And I remember, oh man, I remember it was finally one night. I knew how to listen to like the breathing noises. I remember one night thinking like, oh, I think this is when she's going to die. It gets weaker and weaker. And then there's a thing called agonal breathing. You can YouTube that and look up the sound. I remember doctors and nurses saying like, oh, that's like a warning where the body's about to go. It's very interesting. The body goes through like certain sound effects when it's about to go. It's part of just how the organs function, stuff like that. And I remember luckily I had one aunt there that was so helpful. Bless her. Bless her so much. She cooked for us, for me and my dad, and I think the house was very empty. So luckily I was there, she was there, and it was cooking. She cooked for us, and also she helped clean my mom. We had to roll the body every 2 hours. So I took over the night shift because I was a night owl, and then my aunt and my dad took the day shift. And luckily my parents' Medicare or something like that covered like a nurse to come clean the body every 2-3 days. But yeah, I remember if she looked like she was in pain, I would have to give her medication, although I knew like she was dead, and it's just I think it's just more at ease for like, if you hear a body groaning, it sounds like they're in pain, although I knew my mom wasn't there anymore. So I think it was like Vicodin, that they give in drops and stuff. It's very interesting, all these medications you can give to the dying, I guess, and how it works. And I remember we had to clean my mom's poo and her, I guess, essentially her diaper that we put on her. And luckily my aunt was there to help clean that, because it's much harder to clean like an adult body, I feel like, than let's say a baby. And so this is where I was mad when my aunts and uncles said like, oh, let's do what's it called, keep them alive on a feeding tube, because my dad would have to do this all alone every 2 hours, rolling the body so they don't get bed sores. So anyways, I just remember thinking like, can you die soon? Because this is a lot of work. Caretaker is a lot of work. There's professional people that do this, but we didn't want to, like, it's a lot of money. A nursing home's a lot of money. So, and they, insurance doesn't cover that. And so, yeah, when she died, I was finally relieved. And it was a little bit after my birthday, but I know like some people say, oh, there's certain seasons or holidays or birthdays where people get sad because their loved one died, but it was COVID. So everything was a blur. I remember it was actually, I didn't remember it's Christmas. I only remembered because I looked at the calendar. I was like, today's Christmas. And for Christmas, I was looking through funeral paperwork. It was, I was doing all the paperwork and my dad was having a hard time deciding what, even though I knew what he wanted deep down, but it's more of like waiting for your dad to get to that conclusion. So yeah, all the cleaning and stuff, like my brother, again, he was not there. It was until I messaged him and said, like, when are you coming to help? And then he offered to pay for a night nurse to come to help me roll the body and to clean and stuff like that and give medicine. Really, it's to roll the body. And I just remember not getting enough sleep because people would come visit all the time and I could hear Vietnamese people can be really loud. Let me tell you that. And so I can hear them through the walls. And I remember just thinking like, oh my gosh, can you guys be quiet and let me sleep? So anyways, fast forward to the funeral. I think at that time, during this hospice time at my house, my dad, I could hear him going through motions of begging my mom to wake up, and then other moments of him being like, it's okay, you can go. And this is where it was so emotionally heavy for those weeks. And I remember thinking like, my brother he doesn't have to deal with this. He gets it so easy. And it's like accepted in the family in a way of like, oh, it's guys and girls are treated differently. Let's just put it that way. I think it's a cultural thing too. In the patriarchy. But anyways, I pretty much think of it as a really taxing group project, and I did 90% of it. So anyways, at the funeral, the church happened, you take the funeral, you take it to the funeral home, and you bury it, or they did more prayers, and then they rolled the casket into the ground. And that was the last moment where I remember I just broke down. And I think it was because the casket just rolling into the ground or being lowered into the ground made it so real. And that was it. So I think going through all that, that's my story of how my mom died and the painful process that I went through. So I hope that helped give you a little insight. And more so of, I'm okay with my mom dead. It's the person that's really hurting is my dad. And he still hurts to this day. I wish my mom just died from a heart attack, to be honest, because there's a feeling of, oh, her body crapped out on her versus she died under someone else's hand. There's just so much complex parts of that. I forced my dad to get into therapy. I know you're not supposed to force people, but I was like, you need to go or else you're spiraling. And also you can't use me as a therapist. I didn't say that to him, but that was the reason why. And luckily I had friends I could ask for help. It's hard because my friends live in different parts of the country and I needed hands-on help. So I later told them and they were all shocked because, I just couldn't tell anyone about my mom because I had so much to do on my plate. And finally I was like, you know what? I didn't want to reply to so many, I'm so sorry, I empathize with you, whatever texts. It was just more on my own personal workload. So I kind of told towards the tail end when things were like wrapping up or when things were already done. And again, my friends are great. They're always there to be like, let us know if you can help with anything. I remember my dad needed prescription medicine because he has psoriasis, and one of my friend's moms is a pharmacist, and she was like, oh, like this medication's so expensive, Humira actually, but she was able to find a way where she's like, oh, check this out. I think they cover it for free. And I was like, thank God, because I had to like research online and it was really hard to find. As you know, American healthcare system is very broken. So there were people I knew how to lean on, but I just couldn't have any really hands-on help at where I was at my dad's home. So in terms of like paper and finances and stuff like that. So it was, to be honest, I was very relieved when I finally flew back to LA. And that's my story. So I hope this helps give you insight to what it's like for grieving and death, but also If you've lost a loved one, I hope this makes you feel less alone. And I will be opening up a grief and loss program that is to come in a couple of weeks. If you are interested or want to learn more about it, make sure you visit thehappyhealingshop.com. I'll also include some free resources down below, including my free end of life planner, because I was so overwhelmed on things to take care of for my mom. And luckily I created this list like years ago, and I've given it to other people and they found it so extremely helpful. Everyone knows sort of how to wedding plan, but it's rare that you know someone that knows how to funeral plan. And when you're trying to plan this funeral, you're so emotionally taxed and you're trying to figure everything out and dealing with death. So I hope that guide will help you. One thing I forgot to add as well is during this time, I also got laid off at Disney. So it was just like one after the other and after the other. And we were trying to launch the Reiki course on at the Happy Healing Shop at the same time. And so during that time, I had some downtime stuff. I was recording videos, I was recording audios, and I was struggling with that too, because with my team, I didn't tell them because I didn't want so many messages of sympathy and stuff like that during that time. And I had to cover for my ex-business partner because she was going through mental things, and it was just hard. It was just a really hard time. So there's that. There's my story. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and click that follow button right now so you don't miss out on any episodes coming up. I'd be really grateful if you left me a review over on Spotify or Apple. That way other people can find my podcast. And remember, the fun does not stop here. It continues over at thehappyhealingshop.com, where you find a ton of more resources, including blogs, guides, video series, online courses, and more. As you know, finding support when life's challenges hits you is very important. If you're looking for a beautiful and kind spiritual community to be a part of and to lift you up, we have the Facebook group Happy Healers and also the Happy Healing Club, my membership group that includes access to guided meditations, healing events, happy hours, and so much more. I'll include all the links down below in the show notes. And until we meet again, my friend, always remember to shine your light brightly and to share your story, because you'll never know who it can help, give hope to, or inspire to create a change in their own world. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.